My life always seemed harmonious to me, like a meticulously adjusted mechanism. I lived in a quiet suburb of a small European town, where every day was predictable and measured. My husband, Daniel, was caring and attentive. We shared a cozy home that I loved with all my heart. We had built this life together, and I was sure that nothing could disrupt it. But one day, everything changed. Max, Daniel's nephew, came to stay with us for a few weeks. He was a young photographer working on some new project in our town. From the very first moment he arrived, I felt a strange excitement inside. Max had changed since the last time I saw him. Now he seemed more confident, mature. His eyes sparkled with some inner strength. He was both attractive and mysterious, making me feel a discomfort I was not used to. From the very first glance, I realized that something had changed between us. Max looked at me differently than before, with a slight squint, as if trying to decipher my thoughts. It made me uncomfortable, but I couldn't ignore the feeling. His presence filled my home with an energy I hadn't felt in a long time. And though I tried to push these thoughts away, they kept coming back, eroding my confidence in myself and the idea that my life was truly perfect. With each passing day, I noticed more how he watched me, how his gaze lingered on me just a little longer than it should. I tried not to give it much thought, but something about his demeanor, the way he smiled, awakened forgotten sensations in me. Max became a shadow that followed me everywhere, invading my thoughts and disrupting my usual routine. I tried to keep my distance, but the feeling that an invisible connection had formed between us grew stronger. And at some point, I realized that the first crack in my perfect life had already appeared. A week had passed since Max moved in with us. Every day I felt his presence growing stronger. He was always nearby, in the kitchen with a cup of coffee, or in the garden with a camera in hand. Max was actively photographing the surroundings, and one day he invited me to join him for a walk around town to take some pictures. I agreed, thinking a bit of fresh air would do me good and distract me from daily chores. We wandered through the old streets of the city center, looking at shop windows and enjoying the autumn sun. Max constantly clicked his camera, capturing every little detail. His enthusiasm was infectious, and I began to see the city through his eyes, the eyes of an artist who notices beauty in the most unexpected places. We stopped at every interesting door, old lamppost, street musician. Max complimented me, noticing my laughter, the way I tucked my hair behind my ear, how I marveled at little things. He noticed details that Daniel had long since stopped noticing. I found myself enjoying Max's attention. He was sincere, his compliments were simple, yet accurate. We discussed his work, he asked for my opinion on each photograph, and I felt at ease with him. Max seemed more open and emotional than I remembered. One evening, we were sitting in the living room, going through his latest photos. Max was talking about his ideas, sharing his thoughts on how he wanted to convey moods through his shots. I admired his passion for photography, his ability to see beauty in the ordinary. At one point, he placed his hand on my shoulder to show me a shot up close. His touch was light, but lingered longer than necessary. I felt a wave of excitement wash over me. I forced myself to focus on the photographs, but all I could think about was his hand on my shoulder. I looked up and met his gaze. In that moment, something shifted between us. Max seemed to be waiting for my reaction, but I didn't know what to say. I quickly stood up, saying it was getting late, and went to my bedroom. My heart was pounding, and my mind was in complete turmoil. I couldn't understand what was happening to me. It was just a touch, but it made me feel something more. Max continued to linger in my thoughts, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just begun. After that evening with the photographs, I found myself thinking about Max more and more. I was drawn to him despite all the reasonable arguments I tried to give myself. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was happening between us. My heart would either stop or beat faster every time I saw him. The next day, Max suggested a walk through the forest near our house. He said he wanted to take some nature shots and asked if I wanted to join him. I agreed, thinking that some fresh air might help me clear my thoughts and rid myself of this uneasy feeling. The forest was quiet and peaceful, with soft autumn light filtering through the dense foliage, casting beautiful shadows on the ground. Max photographed everything around: leaves, dewdrops on spider webs, random birds hiding in the branches. I watched him move through the forest with ease and confidence, his eyes gleaming with passion. Step by step, we walked deeper into the woods, and our conversations became more personal. Max started talking about his feelings, about how his passion for photography helped him see the world differently, and that sometimes in life, there are moments when one should follow their feelings, even if it seems wrong. He spoke with such sincerity and conviction that I involuntarily began to think about my own desires and feelings. His words touched something deep inside me. I understood he was hinting at what was happening between us, but I didn't know what to say. Inside me, a battle raged between reason and emotion. I couldn't allow myself to succumb to my feelings, but at the same time, something about his words seemed true. As the evening light began to fade, Max suddenly stopped and turned to me. He slowly reached out and gently took my hand. I felt the warmth of his palm, and my heart immediately quickened its pace. I looked at his hand, at our intertwined fingers, and couldn't utter a word. At that moment, I realized I was on the verge of something very important, something that could change my life. But I still didn't know if I was ready to take that step. We stood in silence, and I couldn't understand what was happening in my soul, fear or desire. The next day, Max suggested we go to a small lake nearby. His voice sounded so casual, as if it were the most ordinary idea, but inside I felt an instant rush of anxiety. I hesitated, tried to come up with an excuse to decline, but couldn't find convincing enough words. In the end, I agreed, thinking that a walk in nature might help calm all these thoughts swirling in my head. We drove to the lake in his car. The road was scenic. Green hills and fields alternated with dense groves, and the sun's rays played on the water in the distance. Max drove calmly, occasionally glancing at me in a way that made my heart race. I tried to look out the window to avoid his gaze, but I could feel the tension growing between us. When we reached the lake, the day was warm and sunny. The water in the lake was crystal clear, and a light breeze rippled its surface. We found a small clearing where we settled with a picnic. Max pulled out a thermos of coffee and a few sandwiches, and we started talking about all sorts of things, from nature to his project. The longer we sat there, the more I felt myself losing control over my emotions. Max was charming. His conversations were captivating, and I couldn't help but laugh. It seemed as if time had stopped, and we were in a small world where there was only the two of us. As the sun began to set, the lake was bathed in golden light, creating a quiet, almost magical atmosphere around us. Max suddenly moved closer to me, his face becoming serious. I felt his hand softly touch my cheek. At that moment, all my thoughts vanished, and I could only feel. He leaned in and gently touched my lips with his. I tensed, wanting to push him away, but I couldn't. My hands stopped on his chest, and I felt his heart beating beneath my palms. And instead of resisting, I gave in to the moment, feeling his warmth spreading through my body. The kiss lasted longer than I expected, and when it ended, I abruptly pulled away. My head spun, and my heart was pounding so hard it felt like it would leap out of my chest. I didn't know what to say or how to act. All I felt was confusion and shame. I stood up and quickly walked to the car without looking back. Max called out to me, but I didn't respond. I needed to leave, to run away, not to let these feelings completely overwhelm me. When I returned home, Daniel met me at the door. He looked both excited and slightly worried. "Where have you been?" he asked with a slight smile, which I sensed held a hint of suspicion. We went to the lake, Max and I, just to get some fresh air," I tried to reply calmly, but my voice betrayed my anxiety. "That's good," he nodded, pulling me close and kissing my forehead. "I was just about to call you. Dinner is almost ready." His tenderness and care hit me hard. I felt like a traitor, as if I had already cheated on him, even though nothing had really happened. Or had it? Inside, everything was a jumble, and I couldn't sort out my feelings. I followed Daniel to the kitchen, feeling anxiety and guilt filling every cell of my being. I knew I had to do something, but I didn't know what. A few days after we returned from the lake, Daniel announced that he had to leave for a business trip for a week. I felt my heart skip a beat. Now I was left alone with Max in the house. My first thought was that this was a test, but soon I realized it felt more like temptation. Daniel hugged me before he left, smiling gently and warmly as always. "I won't be gone long," he said, looking into my eyes. "Try not to miss me too much." I nodded, trying to hide my anxiety behind a polite smile. We exchanged a kiss, and I felt his familiar taste and smell, so well known and comforting. But inside me, a storm was brewing. As soon as the door closed behind him, I felt a strange mix of relief and anxiety. During the first few days, Max and I tried to keep our distance. I immersed myself in my own tasks, trying not to cross his path, and he seemed to respect my space. We exchanged only fleeting glances and formal phrases, but the tension between us grew stronger, almost palpable. Every time our eyes met, I felt a heat spreading through my chest. Evenings were the hardest. I tried to avoid moments when we could be alone, but one evening, while I was cooking dinner, Max walked into the kitchen. His face was serious, his eyes focused. I felt my hands begin to tremble as he came closer. "Emma?" he started softly, his voice low and confident. "I can't do this anymore. I can't pretend I don't feel anything." I froze, my thoughts racing. I wanted to say something, but I didn't know what. Max continued speaking. "You feel it too. I see it in your eyes. I don't know if it's right or wrong, but I can't stay silent any longer." He took a step toward me, and before I could understand what was happening, he kissed me again. This time his kiss was insistent, full of passion, and I couldn't resist. My thoughts vanished, giving way to emotions. I felt his arms tighten around me, and my body responded to his touch. It was like an explosion. All the feelings I had been holding back burst out. At that moment, I forgot everything except what was happening right here, right now. When the kiss ended, we both stood there, breathing heavily, as if we had just crossed some invisible boundary. But instead of relief, I felt panic growing inside me. What had I done? I stepped back, trying to regain control, but my legs wouldn't obey. Max looked at me, waiting for a response, but I said nothing. I turned and quickly went to my room, closing the door behind me. My heart was pounding, and my mind was in complete chaos. After that kiss, I couldn't sleep for a long time. My thoughts raced from one thing to another, my heart beating faster than usual. I knew I had crossed a line, one from which there was no turning back. But what to do next? I had no idea. The next day, Max was calm, as if nothing had happened. He suggested we cook dinner together. I agreed, hoping that a simple activity would bring us back to normal. We started cooking in the kitchen, exchanging jokes and small talk about daily matters. But with every passing moment, I felt something growing between us. Something unseen, but very powerful. We discussed movies and books, shared our favorite scenes and characters, and then moved on to more personal topics, dreams, fears, moments that had changed us. I felt him getting closer, his words becoming more intimate. His presence captivated me, drew me in. Max touched me, seemingly accidentally, handing me a dish, gently brushing my hand, standing next to me just a bit longer than necessary. These touches made me feel alive, as if every movement of his awakened something new, something long forgotten. We laughed, chatted, and at some point, I realized that I could no longer resist this attraction. That evening, we were alone in the living room, and I no longer tried to leave. We sat on the couch, and he began talking about his life, his feelings, his desires. I listened, feeling my defenses crumble one by one. At some point, I felt his arm around my shoulders, and I couldn't push him away. I turned to him, and he kissed me again, this time more confidently, passionately. I returned his kiss, and soon we found ourselves in his room. Everything happened so quickly that I didn't even realize how it happened. Our bodies intertwined, and I forgot about everything else. It was a night full of passion and desire that I would never forget. When morning came, I felt different. I lay in bed, looking at Max, realizing that nothing would ever be the same again. My feelings for him were real, strong, and deep. I could no longer ignore what was happening. Max slept beside me, his face calm and relaxed. I got up, dressed, and decided to try to act as if everything was normal. But every gesture, every word felt like a lie. I knew I had changed, that now everything was different. Inside, emotions raged, guilt, fear, but also an indescribable joy that I had allowed myself to feel this, even if it was wrong. All day I tried to go about my usual activities, but everything reminded me of Max, of how his hands had touched me, how his voice had sounded next to me, of what had happened last night. My life would never be the same. On the 5th day of Daniel's business trip, I started feeling that something was off. The silence in the house was becoming unbearable. Max and I spent almost all our time together, talking, cooking dinners, discussing books and movies, laughing and exchanging looks full of hidden meanings. We were enjoying our closeness as if we were the only ones in this world. But that evening, something felt different. I felt restless and nervous, like something was approaching that I couldn't foresee. Max suggested we have some wine, and we sat on the couch, laughing at some random episode of a movie playing on the TV. Suddenly, I heard the door open. My heart stopped for a moment, then began pounding wildly. I turned and saw Daniel in the doorway. His face was like stone, his eyes wide with shock. "What is going on here?" he asked, and there was more than just surprise in his voice. There was anger, hurt, disappointment. I quickly stood up, feeling my hands start to tremble. I didn't know what to say, how to explain, how to justify. Max stood up too, his face becoming tense. "Daniel, I can explain," I began, trying to steady my trembling voice, but he cut me off. "Don't say anything," he said with cold resolve. "I don't need your explanations. Everything is clear to me." Max took a step forward, trying to say something, but Daniel stopped him with a gesture. "I don't want to hear anything from you either, Max. Both of you. Just leave." His words hit like a blow. A heavy silence hung in the room, and I felt it pressing down on me. My eyes filled with tears, and I couldn't comprehend how everything had gone so far. I wanted to explain, to apologize, to do something to turn everything back. But it was too late. Max stood beside me, his face remaining firm, but I saw his glance slide over to me, full of regret. He slowly nodded and turned to leave. I stood there, not knowing what to do. My heart was torn apart by feelings of guilt, fear, and regret. Daniel turned away, his shoulders slumped, and I understood that he didn't want to see us anymore. Max and I left the house, and as soon as the door closed behind us, I felt the cold wind pierce right through me. We had lost everything. Everything we had with Daniel was destroyed in an instant. I stood outside, not knowing what to do next. Max stood silently beside me, his gaze lost. We both understood that now we would have to face the consequences of our actions, and that the secret we tried to hide was now exposed. Max and I stepped outside, and the door closed behind us with a dull sound that seemed to echo in my heart. I stood on the porch, feeling the cold wind brush against my cheeks. My feet felt glued to the ground, and I couldn't take a single step. Everything inside me had collapsed. Daniel was gone, and with him, my entire previous life had disappeared. I felt a sharp pain, as if someone had torn a part of my soul away. How could I have destroyed everything so easily? How could I have let a single moment change my entire life? These questions spun in my head, but there were no answers. Max stood next to me, and I felt his presence like a weight on my shoulders. We were silent, and the silence between us was becoming unbearable. Finally, he spoke. "Emma," he began quietly, his voice sounding rough, "I think we need to stop. Everything that happened, it was a mistake." I turned to him. His words were like a slap. He looked at me with an expression of pain and regret, and I realized that the fire that had been in his eyes before was gone. "A mistake?" I whispered, feeling my lips tremble. "Do you really think it was a mistake?" Max closed his eyes and nodded. "Yes. I can't keep doing this with you, Emma. We've destroyed too much. I've destroyed too much." I felt tears welling up in my eyes. Max's words pierced me like a knife. I realized that our relationship had been just an illusion, a temporary escape from reality. We were both infatuated with each other, but we hadn't seen where it would lead. "So, what now?" I asked, trying to stay calm, but my voice betrayed my pain. "Now?" Max looked into the distance as if searching for an answer in the dark sky. "Now we need to move on. I don't know where, but I know we can't be together." These words were the final straw. I felt my entire world crumble around me. I was left alone, lost and empty, not knowing what to do next. I realized that I needed to start all over again, without him, without Daniel, without the life I knew. I felt like I was standing in a desolate place with nothing to hold on to. Max quietly turned and walked away, leaving me alone. I watched him until he disappeared into the darkness. In my heart, there was only a cold sense of loss and emptiness. I was left alone with my mistakes, my pain, and the need to start over. I wandered through the streets, not knowing where I was going. My feet moved mechanically, following no direction, as if obeying an invisible force pushing me forward. The evening city wrapped around me with its indifferent silence, and I felt the emptiness inside me growing deeper. I stopped for a moment in front of a small shop window, but I didn't even see what was displayed there. My thoughts kept circling around what had happened. How did I end up here? How could I destroy my life so quickly and easily? I couldn't find any answers. Everything seemed so meaningless. I had lost everything, my home, my husband, and even my connection with Max, who had become a symbol of something new and bright for me. I didn't know where to go next, didn't know how to fill this enormous emptiness inside me. Every step felt heavy, as if I were carrying a weight on my shoulders that I couldn't shake off. I sat down on a bench in the park, covering my face with my hands. Tears streamed down my cheeks, but I didn't even try to stop them. Inside me, a storm of emotions raged: pain, anger, regret, fear. I felt lost and helpless. I remembered Daniel, his face when he saw Max and me together. I saw the shock and disappointment in his eyes, and that image wouldn't leave me. I had destroyed his trust, ruined our marriage, and broken everything we had built together. I realized I had hurt a person who deserved better. It felt like I had lost everything meaningful in my life, and I was the cause of that destruction. Time passed, but I couldn't force myself to stand up and go anywhere. There was a vast emptiness inside me that I couldn't fill. I realized I had even lost hope for the future. My world was shattered, and I had to start over, but I didn't know where to begin. At some point, I realized I needed to find the strength to keep living. Despite the pain, the regret, the loneliness, I had to move forward. I knew that no one would help me if I didn't take the first step myself. I had to stand up, gather my strength, and move on, despite everything that had happened. I took a deep breath, wiped away the tears, and got up from the bench. I didn't know what lay ahead, but I knew I had to try. My life wasn't over, despite everything I had lost, and in that, there was my only hope. I decided that the only place I could go was my parents' house. With a heavy heart, I returned to the town where I had spent my childhood and knocked on the familiar door. My mother opened it with a worried expression on her face, but she didn't ask any questions. She just hugged me and led me inside. I felt lost and shattered. My parents' home, which once seemed so warm and cozy, now felt strange and empty. I didn't know what to say to my parents, how to explain what had happened. But they didn't press for answers. My parents understood that I needed time. I realized that I couldn't just sit and wait for my life to somehow get better. I needed to take action. The next day, I went to town and found a temporary job at a small local cafe. Working at the cafe wasn't what I had dreamed of, but it helped me distract myself. I learned to smile at customers, serve orders, and pretend that everything was fine, even though a storm was raging inside me. With each passing day, I realized that I needed to learn to value myself. I had depended on others' approval for too long, seeking comfort and confidence in other people's eyes. Now I understood that no one could give me that confidence but myself. One day, while passing by the local cultural center, I saw a notice about painting classes. I became curious and decided to sign up. I had always loved to draw, but had never thought it could become my way of expressing emotions. In the first class, I sat in front of a blank canvas, not knowing where to start. But when the brush touched the paper, I felt something inside me begin to open up. With each stroke, I released my pain, fear, regret, and even anger. I painted everything I felt, everything I was afraid to express in words, and it was liberating. I began to find my inner balance, my strength. I realized that despite all the mistakes I had made, I still had a chance to start over, to build a new life where I could be myself. These classes became my salvation. I found a way to express my feelings through art, and it brought me peace and calm. I understood that my life was not over. It had just begun anew. Gradually, day by day, I began to notice my heart feeling lighter. Living in my parents' house initially seemed like a temporary refuge, but over time I realized that I needed to move forward. I continued working at the cafe and attending painting classes, finding solace in these activities. My hands learned to create something beautiful, and my thoughts grew less heavy. Working at the cafe allowed me to meet different people, Locals, regular customers, and even tourists became a part of my daily interactions. I started finding joy in simple things, the smiles of strangers, brief conversations over a cup of coffee, the opportunity to be helpful. In the painting classes, I met several people who were at a similar crossroads in life. We exchanged stories, shared our experiences and dreams. With every new friend I met, I felt my confidence grow. Their support helped me see my life from a different perspective. One of my new friends was Laura, a young woman who had also gone through a difficult divorce. She was bold and independent, always found the strength to smile, and inspired me with her optimism. We began meeting after classes, walking around the city, visiting museums, and discussing our plans for the future. Laura became not only a friend, but also an example of how one can survive tough times and emerge stronger. I also met Mark, a music teacher who introduced me to the world of sounds and melodies. We played the guitar together, and it helped me express my emotions in a new way. His friendship and understanding helped me believe in myself and my abilities. For the first time in a long time, I felt I could be myself without fear of judgment. With each passing day, I learned to be more independent and confident. I realized that I didn't need external approval to feel whole. My life was filled with new hobbies, new people, and new perspectives. I began to feel that I had the strength and the opportunities to start over. I understood that life goes on, even when it feels like everything is lost. Each day became a step forward, a step toward a new me. I no longer felt lost. I knew I had a future, and that I alone would decide what it would be. Several months had passed since I started my new life. I was learning to live independently, to trust myself, and to find joy in simple moments. My work at the cafe, my painting classes, and my new friends helped me feel part of the world again. I felt like I was gradually finding my way. But one morning, everything changed. I received a message from Max. He had returned to the city and wanted to meet to talk. My heart began to race. I didn't know if I should agree. Max was part of a past I was trying to leave behind. But at the same time, I understood that this conversation was inevitable. I thought about it for a long time before replying, and eventually agreed to meet him in the park. The park was quiet, and autumn leaves fell to the ground, creating a carpet underfoot. I waited for him, feeling anxiety rise inside me. When Max approached, he looked tired and tense. His eyes held so many emotions that I couldn't immediately understand what he was feeling. "Emma," he began, his voice serious, "I know I've brought a lot of problems into your life. I know our relationship became the reason for the destruction of everything we had." I remained silent, waiting for him to continue. Max looked into my eyes, and I saw sincerity in them. "I want to apologize," he continued. "I needed time to understand what happened. My feelings for you were real. I truly wanted to be with you, but I also realized that it was all a mistake. We created so many problems and destroyed what we had." I listened to him, feeling my emotions mix inside me. It was painful to hear, but at the same time, I felt a kind of relief. His confession was honest, and I knew he was telling the truth. "I forgive you, Max," I finally said, my words soft but firm. "I know you didn't want any of this, that you were confused too, but I don't want to tie my life to someone who brought so many problems." Max lowered his head, understanding my words. Regret flashed in his eyes, but also understanding. "I understand, Emma," he replied quietly. "I just wanted you to know that my feelings were sincere. I hoped that maybe we could start over, but now I see that's not possible." We stood in silence, watching the autumn leaves swirl around us. I felt I had made the right choice. Forgiveness did not mean returning to the past. I realized that my life was just beginning to find new meaning, and I did not want to fall back into the shadow of old mistakes. Max said goodbye and left, leaving me alone in the park. But this time, I felt calm. I knew I had taken a step toward freeing myself from the past, and I was now ready for whatever the future held for me. After meeting with Max, I felt liberated from the weight of the past. I realized that our farewell was an important step forward for me. It didn't mean all the memories had vanished, but they no longer defined my life. I decided to dedicate myself to what brought me joy and helped reveal my best qualities. I spent more and more time at the easel, creating paintings that expressed my emotions and thoughts. Art became my refuge, my way of communicating with myself and the world. I noticed that my work had become deeper and more vibrant, as if I had managed to convey my feelings and experiences through them. During one of my painting classes, my teacher said he could see how I had changed, that my paintings were now speaking from the soul, and this was an important validation for me that I was on the right path. I also started seeking new hobbies that would bring me joy. I signed up for yoga and dance classes, where I found new friends and like-minded people. These activities helped me feel stronger and more confident in my body and mind. They filled me with energy and gave me new goals. The time I spent at the cafe had now become not just a job, but a place where I could observe life, interact with people, and find inspiration. I realized that every person who walked through the cafe doors had a unique story, and this changed my perspective on the world. I no longer felt alone. I was part of something bigger. My new friends, Laura and Mark, became my support and source of inspiration. We spent a lot of time together, sharing thoughts and dreams about the future. They helped me understand that I could handle any difficulties if I wasn't afraid to be myself and move forward openly. I realized that the mistakes of the past had made me stronger and wiser. Now I knew that I could handle any challenges life threw at me. Every day was a new step on the path to personal rebirth. I began to think about the future, about the opportunities that lay ahead of me. I didn't know exactly what would come next, but I was no longer afraid of the unknown. I felt that I had the strength to rebuild my life based on who I had become. I understood that there were many opportunities ahead, and that every morning was a new chance to make something better. Now I knew that my life belonged to me, and I was ready to embrace all its challenges and joys. I woke up early in the morning when the first rays of sunlight began to filter through the curtains of my room. This day felt special, even though nothing in the world around me had changed. I felt ready to begin a new chapter in my life, knowing that something important and beautiful awaited me. I got out of bed and walked to the window. Outside, it was still quiet, and the city was just beginning to wake up. I looked at the sky, which was slowly changing from dark to bright blue, and realized that my life was changing too. There was no more fear or doubt inside me. I felt a confidence I had been missing before. I understood that my past no longer defined my future. I had learned to let go of the mistakes and regrets that had weighed me down. Now I saw not an end, but a beginning. The beginning of a new life I was building with my own hands. I took a shower, got dressed, and went down to the kitchen. As I made myself breakfast, I smiled. It wasn't just a morning routine. It was part of my new day, filled with possibilities. I began to plan my next steps. Maybe I would open my own gallery or find a new hobby that would captivate me completely. There were many possibilities, and I felt they were all within my reach. My friends, Laura and Mark, had suggested spending the weekend out of town, and I gladly agreed. We decided to go to a small village by the lake, where we could enjoy nature and have some peaceful time. I was looking forward to this trip, knowing it would be another step in my journey toward myself. As I prepared to leave the house, I paused in front of the mirror in the hallway. I looked at my reflection and saw not the woman who once felt lost and broken, but someone who had found the strength to get up and start over. I smiled at my reflection, knowing that many wonderful moments lay ahead of me. I grabbed my bag, opened the door, and stepped outside. The cool morning breeze caressed my face, and I took a deep breath of fresh air. I felt my feet firmly on the ground, as if they were sure of every step. This day was mine. I was ready to face whatever it would bring with confidence and optimism. I knew my new path was just beginning, and I alone would decide what it would be like. The past was behind me, and a new life lay ahead. And with that first step, I felt a smile spread across my face. My new life was beginning right now, and I was ready to step into it with an open heart